Tim stated, I want the data and I want the facts, and I want them pure facts and pure data. So when you make a decision that would be extremely potential to the city for many, many generations, we do have the facts. And I do have some concerns that it's coming internally from CSU. And I do have some concerns that there's always been a mentality that I've always heard is it's the best, it's the best. I want to have the facts to prove it's the best if it is the best. And if we have other options, there's so much changing in the world today, whether it's potential legal, whether it's potential EPA, we've got to have the plain, pure facts. And then we make decisions. Don't have an assumption and then make the facts fit. And that's what I want for this whole process.
I don't think that that has been even a question as far as us moving forward, because the conversation that the board has had to do an independent analysis along with utilities is already been under the direction of doing an independent, either for the technical aspect of it, and we have done technical studies with IERP done in the past, but we were almost looking at a three-part system where it would be economic development, the technical, environmental, and then also the community. There are a lot of things to take into consideration, and this is a really in-depth look as far as the regulatory regulations, the regulatory commitments that we're going to have, rates, community impact, the alternative energy sources that will be available. And again, too, is with the committee, the community being committed to what it would take to remove that. I don't think a lot of people realize that, again, this is not a dirty, it looks very unattractive to our city as far as a developmental, but it is not an inefficient, dirty plant. And it is not old as far as some of the technical aspects of it. But I also think it's important for a lot of people to realize that whether the Drake plant is there or not, we still will have 32 coal trains coming through that area. It also sits on top of a landfill, which it's been very minimally estimated at $100 million for cleanup, possible cleanup. So there just is so much, but I think our board has been extremely committed to, and working along with you, Mayor, as far as talking about having an independent group look at that, somehow involving the community for the economic development aspect, and then having a very qualitative, quantitative input factor for community. It's a lot. Well,
thank you, Lisa. Aren't the boilers 50 years old? Anybody know? That's what I'm told. The boilers at Market Drake are 50 years old. All I'm suggesting is before we spend, well, let me back up and give you another example. I learned through Laura Newman, and I think you commented to the media about this, that apparently Parks Department was going to spend $90,000 on a bike path master plan for the city. I didn't know we collected a fee when you buy a bicycle, because that's long standing. So the reason I'm going to bring this up, I'll come full circle in a second. So Laura Newman and I talked about that, and then we said, well, what's the plan? What's the business plan for that expenditure? Do we have a business case? Do we have an objective of that study, which would be done outside? Do we have expected outcomes? Do we have a timetable? Well, I don't think we do yet, at least. So we said we're going to hold on that because we're spending money there. It was going to be spent by staff without discussion, I think, with elected leadership. So in this case, what I'm suggesting is the council should control the RFP process and the consultant relationship, not the enterprise. There's an appearance. It's strictly an appearance of a conflict of interest that utilities in this case will conduct a study that will give it the answer it wants. Now, I don't think that's necessarily fair, but I'm just suggesting we have to do more and more to build public trust, and that would be one way to do it. And it may very well be in the end, Martin Drake should stay there for 50 more years, and we, it's not so much the appearance to me, it's the business question of whether it makes sense to spend that kind of money in that location. And again, I have to admit, I'm coming from left field in this because I'm not in the dialogue. I'm just asking.
And that dialogue is taking place. And I think that I've been in several conversations over the last week or two, specifically with regard to Newman, with regard to that spend. It is on slow. They're looking at alternatives to take that technology and push it to Nixon, for example. I mean, those are really good questions that are in the process of trying to get some answers. And I think that from the executive leader through the board, I think we're all committed to having open, transparent and community-wide discussion and go as deep as we can and realize, you know, Jerry Forte's situation is different than Larry McAvoy's. You know, Jerry's been retired. His package is already done. So he may have less legitimate stake in the outcome than we might otherwise presuppose. So I'm not saying that we need to, you know, rely on the executive leaders to come up with that plan, but certainly the motivations might be different.
I'm talking about the appearance of the conflict of interest that
I don't disagree with
something
that.
of this magnitude,
Right.
of this cost magnitude, with an enterprise this large, and if in fact management is controlling the RFP process, the selection of a vendor, and the study itself lends an appearance of conflict. I'm just suggesting council control that.
I agree.
With staff support. Maybe you're doing that.
I think that's what we're trying to do.
Good. Okay.
Actually.
And I think it's important to remind people also that, you know, 2010, at the direction of the past board for utility, this is a $112 million project that $43 million has been spent already. We're still waiting on numbers back of moving that system to Nixon, but it's already been assumed that if that was to happen, we're looking at significant, almost half of loss, which is $20 million. So again, the question then would be is it valid to take a loss of $20 million right now rather than $112 million if there is serious conversation in this community of retiring that plant within, you know, 10 years to 15 years. So, but I think the whole point is that we've learned from the past of how things have gone, especially over the last year, and I hope we've gotten a little bit smarter that the transparency is extremely important to make sure that it doesn't appear biased. And we are discussing all of that, and that's why we thought, rather than another task force, because I think if you polled all of us, I certainly have my own opinions about how the task force have happened with the other enterprises, that maybe a different approach than another task force appointed by board members could be more successful if we did separate it into an independent independent organization looking at the technical environmental aspect, bringing in the community for the economic development aspect, how it would pertain specifically to Colorado Springs, and then even maybe using an independent organization to do the community input and gathering that information, and then even maybe having a project manager to oversee it as well. Though we have been having those conversations since April, actually, to make sure that it's done right, and that everybody is confident with how the process is going.
Well, to me, there are, again, two things. One is governance, and to me, that needs to be a transparent process involving the public, as opposed to council acting as the utility board deciding how to replace itself. And maybe that's in process. So that's point A. Point B is on Martin Break. I understand that money's already been spent, which begs the question, did that council conduct an independent analysis of whether or not to do that before the money was spent? Maybe that's happened. I haven't seen the report. So the concept of basically throwing away $20 million or more is painful. On the other hand, spending, what is it? Is it $200 million or 112 more is what's left? For Drake. Right. So anyway.
So again, I think what we're trying to do is get again back to the core facts and figure out what the situation is, because I certainly don't know. Here's a good question: is what's the impact on rates if we spend 112? You would presume that will impact electric rates, and then so I don't know how many times we can go to the citizens and say, guess what, we're going to raise the rates. I, for one, don't plan to vote for any more rate increases in the near term. So I don't know how we sustain that. I don't know that question's been fully answered. It certainly hasn't been answered to my satisfaction. So I think there's a lot of questions that are out there that people want to have answers to. And as I tried to tell Dr. Newman the other day, is that, I'm sorry that we're asking these questions and into the project, but at some point there are new people at play now, and you need to answer these questions over and over and over. And I've looked at the guys that do SDS who've done a terrific job of answering the questions. I told them they need to follow that model, because if their technology is good and if it does produce the savings it's supposed to, it should withstand the test of regurgitation over and over and over. And I don't know that they've tried to do that successfully, because I, for one, have a lot of questions with regard to Newman and with regard to the things you're bringing up, and they do need to be answered before we move forward.
Just real quick.
Go ahead.
If it's okay, I'm going to try to wrap it up here real quick. This is topics for the board. As I said in my op-ed, board meetings are open. please come participate, and we'll talk about that. Just one last question about just one last comment about the governance. Remember, any change at all to the governance of Colorado Springs Utilities would require a charter change. And so we can have discussions all day long about what the board should or should not do with regards to governance, but in the end result, if there's a decision made to go forward, the final authority on that will be the voters. And that's just the
Okay, thank you, Scott.